Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about three things. One, the coronavirus. Two, Aboriginals. And three, David Littleproud. So let's get started. What I want to say about the coronavirus is probably a little different to what most of you have heard. And I'm still getting my head around it. So happy for people to fact check me. But the World Bank created what they called a PEF, a Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility, back in 2017. Now, my understanding of that is investors put in money. They got an interest rate, there was two different classes, Class A, Class B, interest rates of 11.5% or 6%. And if there's been no pandemic by July 2020, they would get their investment back. So it's like an insurance policy. Most of you will know the World Bank I don't consider to be our friend. I don't think the World Health Organization is our friend either. So I'm very skeptical about this. When I looked into it, apparently there's over $500 billion of capital investment into this. And the concept is it was to be able to provide a very quick financial response for underdeveloped countries. So the people that would get the money would be the 77 poorest countries, of which apparently China is one of these as an underdeveloped country. So there were rules around this, which are included, I have to read them, but if there were 2,500 deaths in the one country, plus another 20 deaths in another country, then that was the starting point for it, and it has to be declared a pandemic. If that happens, the people that invested lose their money. This bothers me a lot because really it's in someone's interest to trigger a pandemic. We know that the One World Government, which, the United Nations is an instrument of theirs, their whole overarching philosophy is to redistribute wealth, take it from the Western countries and distribute it to the poorer countries. Now, with this PEF, the Pandemic Emergency Financial Facility, they listed 6 or 7 different viruses that would be applicable. And of course, one of them was the coronavirus. It concerns me that the money had to be spent, or we had to have the pandemic before July 2020. Otherwise, the people that invested got their money back. So by having them had the pandemic, those people have lost their money, and now that wealth will be redistributed to the poorer countries. The other thing is that the money was meant to provide fast relief. This all came out of the Ebola situation in Africa, and they said they could have saved billions of dollars and thousands of lives if they had been able to act quickly, and that's what launched all of this. But the problem is, for this money to be triggered and distributed, it has to go for 84 days. So it's not till March 23 that this would trigger the aid, the relief. So I'm very skeptical about the whole thing, very skeptical about the fact that the World Health Organization president flew over to China to shake the hand of the Chinese president and tell him what a great bloke he was and how well he has handled the now pandemic that is qualified as a pandemic. So just wanted to give you that little twist, something different to the toilet paper raids, and food for thought. Second thing I want to talk about is Aboriginals. Now, here's my disclaimer on Aboriginals. I think that there's 2 brackets of Aboriginals. And so there is the you and me type Aboriginal, which is the you and me type Italian, the you and me type Vietnamese, you and me type Aboriginal. Everyday people who are just trying to live their lives. They want their children to be protected. They want their children to go to school. They want to have jobs. They want a roof over their head. They want food on the table. They want safety, and they want a hope for their future. So that's the everyday Aboriginal that I consider. The second group is the activist Aboriginals, of which a large percentage of them are white folk, Muslims, Jews. There's a whole lot of activist Aboriginals. So that's my first disclaimer. Under this umbrella of Aboriginals, I'm going to be talking about them over the next few days. The first thing I want to talk about is languaging and the fact that we now call them First Nation people. We never used to do that. There is a lot of evidence to say that there was actually 3 different types of people that came from Asia, and that the Aboriginals that are here now were not the first. In fact, that we had Negroid type Aboriginals, and I'll put the link to a couple of articles that refer to this in the bottom. It's important to start calling them First Nationals from the activist point of view if they're going to push this narrative that we are on their stolen land, that they never conceded their sovereignty, and that we need to pay them rent. And again, there's a push with the Aboriginals and the Muslim Alliance. If you've seen the logo, that's got the Aboriginal boomerang and the Islamic crescent, and the narrative that they're now pushing is that they, the Muslims and the Aboriginals were here way before the Western people, and of course they're all looking for compensation. This is again part of the one world order narrative, that if you've got to remember that the largest voting bloc in the United Nations is the IOC, the Islamic Organization Council. That might not be right, but I'm sure it's the IOC. So they've got the largest voting bloc in the UN, and I just want to talk to you about that. Next thing about the Aboriginals is that we've got the fact that anyone can be one. We know that we spend about $30 to $32 billion a year in our budget on Aboriginals, which equates to between 50 to 60,000 per person. But of course, the people living in outback, Australia, they don't get that money. It all gets flitted away in admin, theft, all sorts of different things. Very little of it actually gets to the real people. We've got Bruce Pascoe. He's been on the news quite a bit lately, and of course he's a white man that claims he's Aboriginal. The tribal people have denounced him as being Aboriginal, but he's written a book called Dark Emu, and he won a literary award, an Aboriginal literary award. He teaches as an Aboriginal at the university. And my concern is, if he's winning these awards and he's not really Aboriginal, then he's stealing. He's actually stealing from them. But again, they're rewriting history, because his book says that the Aboriginals were, they weren't just hunters and gatherers. They had villages of over 1,000 people, and they had cattle in pens. Well, if you talk to any Aboriginal, they'll tell you that that's just ridiculous. But he's saying that he's researched the books and our history books, and that he has a different slant on it. Bruce Pascoe, of course, has also going to have a documentary. The ABC have embraced him, and they're going to write a documentary about what he's saying is our history. I think he represents a lot of people who put their snout in the trough of the Aboriginal money, and wherever there's a lot of money, there's always corruption. Now, we also have Bob Katter has just told everyone that he's a black fella. That's his words, not mine. And that he was quite angry on Sky News the other day. Again, I'll put the link down below. And he was telling us that, they can't even buy property. Well, of course, any Aboriginal can buy property, just like you and I can buy property. You've got to have a deposit, go to the bank, and then pay your mortgage. That's it. You get into that cycle. What he was really referring to was the fact that on their traditional land that they have been given, which is 20% of Australia's land mass, apparently, they have control over the traditional lands. They can't have private property on those lands. Now, this is something that Warren Mundine, who is an Aboriginal, he wrote a great book called Black and White, and back in 2005, he spoke about the fact that the way to get Aboriginals out of poverty was you had to get the people working and the children into school. This is exactly what Tony Abbott said when Scott Morrison gave him the special role of going around and finding out what to do. Exact same thing was said. So they need to find ways of using their traditional native title land to create income. So that's all I'm going to say about Aboriginals for now. But I will be doing a little bit on Aboriginals every day. Got a lot to cover with as far as they're concerned, because we have to find a solution. We cannot have what's been happening to the children and the women continue the way it is. And the way Bob Katter's talking about, where he shakes his fist on this Sky News and says if we don't listen to him and the activists, that there will be like South Africa and there'll be blood in the streets. Well, I think that's very threatening. That's hate speech. And I think we have to find a far better solution. Now, the third topic is David Littleproud. So David Littleproud is the Honourable David Littleproud MP. He's the Deputy Leader of the Nationals, and he's the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management. With what we've been through in the last 6 months, that man has been under the pump. I went to this forum which was on drought and bushfires, and I really wasn't expecting much what I'd seen of him on media. But I have to say, I was impressed. Apparently he's come from a bank manager's background, lived out Chinchilla way. His electorate is the size of 3 times the size of Victoria. He's a busy man. And when you think that he's got the whole Murray-Darling to look after, drought, the fires, the floods, I was impressed. He was across all his numbers, he was across all his policies. He talked about what they'd been doing for the drought, and he talked about how they'd put, the different money that had gone out and how quickly it had gone out. A lot of people don't understand what is federal and what is state. And just to digress here, Morrison got hammered over the bushfires, but it wasn't his job. People don't seem to understand. It was the state's responsibility, which is why we're having this commission, because he wants to be able to act quickly without asking permission. The way the Constitution has it set up, Morrison has to wait to be asked by the states to get involved. Anyway, that's for another time. So David spoke about the drought money, the money that went quickly out into people's bank accounts to put bread and butter on the table. But he also spoke about the money that went into the communities to keep the communities viable, to keep people building infrastructure things, spending money at the hardware stores, all of those sorts of things. I actually asked him a question around the properties that have been locked up for carbon credits, because that concerns me a lot. What bothers me is who's getting that carbon credit money and what are they doing with it. There's not a lot of people that trade in carbon credits, and I mean, one of them is Al Gore, so that just gives you an idea of what I think about carbon credits. So we have all these properties out west. If we look at Quilpie, properties that have been locked up, no land management. That's a major problem. So there's terrible weed problem, terrible problem with foxes. No one living in the houses. They've turned the lights out. So you haven't got the children going to school. You haven't got people buying the groceries. You haven't got the trucks coming in and out with cattle, buying fuel, all of those sorts of things. To me, that was in direct contrast to what they were doing with the drought funds, and they were in opposition to each other, these two policies. And when I spoke to him about that, he said, yes, it was one of those unexpected consequences of the carbon credit locking the properties up. And the way he spoke about it was that they are looking at it and they know they've got to deal with that. So I found that encouraging. I have a real heart for our rural agricultural farmers, our food producers, our dairy farmers, all of the people out there that we have to look after them, we have to care about them, we have to encourage them because we don't want to be buying in powdered milk from China. We don't want to be importing all of our food. Can you just imagine if China decides to just cut off supply? It was interesting to hear David Littleproud talk about trade agreements with regard to agriculture, and I'm really pleased, that Scott Morrison's been negotiating with Japan and with India and with Indonesia to diversify where we're sending all of our food production. I was really encouraged. I came away thinking, with Littleproud and Matt Canavan on the Nationals, they've got some good people coming up through those ranks. So I was happy about that. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. Just with the coronavirus, just wash your hands with soap and water. I think that's all we need to do. Don't kiss strangers, and keep our trust in God, keep your joy, and I'll talk to you soon.